Hi, my name is Doug Soldat. I'm an extension specialist at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and am happy to talk to you today about lawns and water quality. So I work at the OJ Noor Turfgrass Research and Education Facility out in Verona, just south of Madison, and this is a view of the building with some of the plots in the foreground. And so we study everything from golf course putting green style grass, which is mowed 6 days a week at the thickness of an eighth of an inch, which is like about two credit cards stacked together. So really, really intensely managed turf. And then we also study low mow or no mow and very minimally managed grass, which you also see there in the foreground as well. So anything related to turf grass, we study. And so today we're going to talk to you a bit about things we've learned about turf grass and their relationship to environmental and water. Had the opportunity to come up to Green Lake and work with members of the Green Lake Association as well as UW Extension back in 2016. So this is a shot of a group of us talking about one of the lawns up there on Green Lake and how to manage it for optimal water quality. So today we are going to cover, I think, about 5 key points here. So number one, your soil quality makes a really big difference. A lot of times we just talk about the green stuff that we can see on top when it's more about the brown stuff underneath that makes the biggest difference. Not all lawns are created equal. So some lawns can have a really minimal environmental impact with very low management inputs. Other lawns require some inputs. And so it depends. It's a very site-specific situation. If soil is compacted, or if you do have a poor soil, which is back into point one here, we're going to recommend adding a 1/4 inch of compost in the spring and the fall for 3 years to improve it, and that improvement will last and be dramatic. And we'll come back to more on that in a bit. Point number 4, turf density is really important to reduce runoff, and I'll show you some data that supports that. And the data suggests that 2 fertilizations per year is a responsible practice to maintain turf grass density. So this is kind of counterintuitive. I think the majority of folks believe that any fertilization event or any input into the lawn is going to have a negative impact. And actually the research says sometimes inputs are necessary and beneficial for water quality because you're using those inputs to gain turf grass density. And then number 5 is a nice, quick, and easy one. Not all weeds are created equal. In this case, clover is a friend and crabgrass is an enemy. And I'll explain what is meant by that in a second here. All right, so this is a picture of what my lawn looked like when I moved to Madison a number of years ago. Urban soils are notorious for having poor soil quality. Healthy soil is the key to success of the lawn. Not only is it important for the lawn to grow, but it's also important for the rainwater to be able to soak into the ground. So you need a healthy soil for roots to grow down to allow the plant to be thick, but you also have to have some pore spaces for the water to soak in and infiltrate, keep it from running off the surface. During home construction, often the soil is compacted. The clays are dug up from the basement, spread around the house, and then compacted. And so this is the backyard of my house. You can see this implement here that's giving me about 2 inches of good, healthy topsoil on top of a compacted clay and rocky mix. So this is the problem. This is why we have a lot of issues with poor, thin lawns and a lot of stormwater runoff is because our soils aren't in good shape. So we can't go to a lot of these situations and till them up because you have utilities and gas lines and electric. You got things buried in them which would be damaged by that. So one solution that we've developed at the University of Wisconsin is to apply compost on top of your lawn to essentially build up the soil above the existing ground level. And we found, here's one of our undergraduate workers spreading the compost on a plot. These plots are 6 feet by 4 feet, but you basically calculate an amount that you need, and then you rake that compost evenly out over the lawn. We say a 1/4 inch. It should look about like this. So you can see definitely compost in the canopy, but you can also see green grass tips growing above the compost. This is about the right rate of application. So you want to do this in the spring, you want to do this in the fall for 3 years straight, and if you do that, you're going to have a really, really good result. We've Here you can see the different plots here. We tested different types of composts and different rates, but again, a 1/4 inch in the spring and a 1/4 inch in the fall seems to be a really good application rate. And you want to do that for about 3 years. We're going to change gears here a bit, and we went from a nice pretty picture to kind of a intimidating scientific figure here. But this is a relationship that was developed by a coworker of mine, Zach Easton, who's now at Virginia Tech University, and he's showing here the density shoots per square centimeter. As that increases from 2 in this graph to 14 along the x-axis, you can see two things happen at once. The first is the infiltration rate, which is the solid line, increases. This is the rate that water soaks into the soil. So as your shoot density increases, helps the water soak into the soil. And then the inverse of infiltration rate is runoff rate. So if the water can do two things when it hits your lawn, it can run off the surface or it can soak into the soil. And so if more is infiltrating, as you'd expect, the dashed line here, this is our runoff, that decreases. So as shoot density is at the very low end here, we have a low rate of infiltration, a high rate of runoff, and as we grow more thicker grass, we have less runoff and a lot more infiltration, and that of course is what we want. So this graph is telling us that dense lawns are desirable from a water quality standpoint. So Zach Easton continued that work here for his PhD project, and he evaluated high maintenance turf, which had 3 fertilizer applications per year. You can see the nice thick green lawn there. Low maintenance turf, which is just a typical lawn where somebody just mows it. Half of all Americans just mow their lawn and they don't apply any fertilizer. And then he's looked at wooded land, so that you can see what looks like here, maybe some weeds, some bare soil, but also maybe some native vegetation as well. And he collected runoff from 77 rainfall events, and this was in Ithaca, New York, over a 2-year period. And these plots were spaced throughout a watershed. And so you're looking at the top of the watershed here. It flows downhill to the bottom of the watershed. Along the stream, and near the top of the watershed we had really good soils, deep soils, sandy, more sand in them. In the middle block we had kind of intermediate soils, and then the block 3 near the outlet of the watershed, they had high runoff potential. They were compacted, they had high clay content, and it meant that they're just more, when rain fell, it was more likely to run off in block 3 than it was block 1. So this is the phosphorus loss data. So again, maybe one thing we should have said in the beginning is our goal is to keep phosphorus out of Green Lake, and phosphorus is what accelerates the growth of algae and decreases water quality. And so we're looking at the total phosphorus loss to the water body or from those plots. And so the different colors here, the blue is the high maintenance, the phosphorus loss from the high maintenance grass, the purple reddish is the low maintenance, and the yellow is from the wooded land. And one thing you notice right away is that there's a really strong trend. The high runoff potential, you lose a lot more phosphorus than in the low runoff potential, where the total phosphorus losses are relatively low. In poor soils, in the high runoff potential soils, it didn't matter if we had high maintenance, low maintenance, or wooded land, we lost about the same amount of phosphorus. But when we start to get to the better soils, the healthier soils, the medium runoff potential, the low runoff potential, what Zach found was that you actually got less phosphorus loss from the high maintenance lawns than you did from the medium maintenance or the low maintenance. And the thought behind this is that the high maintenance lawns had a more dense stand of turf, which slowed the runoff water down and allowed it to soak into those soils, which could receive them. Now, if the soils were in bad condition, that density didn't do too much to help, or anything to help. So that's a really interesting finding. A dense lawn on a good, healthy soil is a way to reduce phosphorus loss from a site. A similar result was found closer to home here. This was a University of Minnesota study that occurred over 3 years. You can see a plot on the left, which is more yellow, than the plot on the right, which is darker green and growing more vigorously. In this study, the plot on the left was not fertilized, but had more phosphorus runoff than the plot on the right, which was fertilized. So again, the thicker grass on the right slowed the water down, reducing phosphorus losses. Their results were that unfertilized turf had more phosphorus loss than fertilized turf, and they also found evidence that if you used a zero phosphorus fertilizer, you could reduce your phosphorus losses even more. So your lawn almost certainly doesn't need phosphorus to grow if it's already established. You just need to add nitrogen. So only add nitrogen to increase that density and keep the middle number on the bag of fertilizer at 0. So just this morning, Crystal Campbell from Dane County, she's a Dane County Stormwater Educator Coordinator, part of the Madison Area Municipal Stormwater Partnership, came out to the OJ Nor facility and brought her rainfall simulators, and we collected samples from around the station. And at the top of these vegetation samples, we poured 1.5 cups of water, and these little containers at the top have little holes in them which simulate rainfall. So we kind of produced a storm on top of these samples, and then at the bottoms of them, we have collectors, and we can measure how much runoff occurs from these samples. So it was pretty fun to play around with this and look and do some comparisons from different areas, different turf grass that's managed in different areas and has different densities. So one of the plots that we tested was our compost trial plots that I showed a picture of. And here you can see the compost that's built up on the surface over that 3-year period, that really dark brown, thick, healthy soil at the top, the close up on the left, and just kind of a zoomed out view there on the right. But that's the type of healthy soil that we were able to build after 3 years applications. We also tested the worst case scenario. So in the beginning, I said clover is your friend and crabgrass is your enemy. And this is what I'm talking about. This area was absolutely inundated by crabgrass last year. And crabgrass is a warm season grass. It dies at the first frost, and it doesn't come back until June. And so what you're left with is a lot of bare soil. You have very thin turf, a lot of bare soil, and this is really negative for water quality, and we're going to show you what happened in our simulations from today. So here is our compost lawn on the left, and there's a lot of clover in there. We'll talk about clover in a second, but clover grabs nitrogen out of the air and uses it to grow, and it also shares some with the grass. So we have a lawn here that's got Kentucky bluegrass and clover and a nice healthy layer of compost, and we're going to compare that to this a few plants of Kentucky bluegrass and then a bunch of bare soil where the crabgrass was living last year. So we're going to see how dramatically different these two treatments are. Here they are all lined up on the table, and on the very far left we have pavement. So we put a 1.5 cups of water in the container, and it's all going to run off. And then we also had a natural area. So here's the results here. The traditional pavement After the rain was allowed to fall on the pavement, we put down 1.5 cups and we got 1.5 cups back. The natural area, which was collected from a prairie earlier today, had almost no runoff. So you can see there's very little water in that. We started with 1.5 cups, and this natural area was able to absorb the majority of that 1.5 cups of water that was put on it. This is a compacted lawn from kind of a shaded lawn that's just mowed. So shade is bad for lawns. Lawns aren't able to grow thickly in shade. So what happens is you get more runoff. So we added 1.5 cups, and you can see we got about 1 cup of that back. So not great. But the water's pretty clear, which means that we didn't lose a lot of soil. There was enough turf density there to protect the soil, but we still ended up with a lot of runoff. This is one of the worst ones. This is the crabgrass infested lawn that I just showed you, and you can see the water is brown. It's dirty. We lost some soil there. That soil likely contains phosphorus, which would pollute our lake. And we added 1.5 cups, and you can see that we're about over 1.25 cups. So almost all of that water ran off from that bare soil. Now we're going to get to some of the better ones. This is a fescue lawn. A fine fescue lawn is a really good low maintenance lawn. It does really well with minimal inputs. This one was just mowed only. It's about 14 years old now, and it has had nothing done to it except for mowing in those 14 years. And you can see it looks almost as good as the natural area. It has maybe 1/3 of a cup of runoff in it, and the rest it was able to absorb. Similarly, this is our Kentucky bluegrass clover lawn that has been compost treated. So it used to be a poor soil. We improved the soil, and it has only been mowed since those compost applications were made back in 2012 or so. So 8 years of no inputs other than mowing. And you can see here we have about 1/2 cup of runoff, and it's very clear. So looks almost as good as the natural area that was here right next to it. So one of the, how dense do you need your lawn? And that's a question that's hard to answer. We did these comparisons. Crystal Campbell and I did these two comparisons. The lawn on the left has more dandelions, which means it's thinner. It has less of a density than the one on the right, which is fertilized twice a year. So one note here, if you hate dandelions, for all that's done to get rid of them on the right side of the picture was fertilized twice a year. Fertilizing twice a year keeps the lawn thick enough to keep the dandelions from being able to germinate very easily. So no herbicides have been applied. On the left, no fertilizer has been applied. The lawn slowly thins out. The dandelions come in. When we tested these two, actually the one with dandelions had a little bit less runoff than the one on the right. So this one was still had enough density to perform good. Now again, this soil was in good shape. If this was a compacted soil, you might find better results from the lawn that was fertilized. But anyway, what I would recommend you do is if you have a lot of dandelions, it's an indication that your lawn density is slipping, and you might want to think about increasing it. Not that dandelions have a necessarily negative impact on water quality. They're just sort of an indicator that your lawn density isn't enough, and those weed seeds are getting in there and able to germinate. Clover is an awesome addition to Kentucky bluegrass. This is the exact same type of grass planted at the exact same time. The only difference is the one on the left had clover mixed in and the one on the right didn't. And you can see after, I think this picture was taken about 2 or 3 years after establishment, the one on the left, there's some clover in it, but the one on the right is almost all dandelions because the Kentucky bluegrass will thin out without regular additions of nitrogen, either by your fertilizer or from the clover, which is the natural. Okay, wrapping up here, just a couple of my recommendations for healthy lawns and lakes. Eliminate your bare soil areas. If you have crabgrass, prevent it. And now is the optimum timing this weekend for preventing crabgrass if you had it last year. If you have compacted poor soil, you're going to want to improve it. You can aerify. That's not the greatest treatment, but the best thing to do is improve it with compost over time. If you have dense shade, eliminate that shade or find a shade tolerant ground cover. If you don't have bare soil areas, think about maintaining good turf density. If you have a lot of dandelions, not the worst thing in the world, but it's an indicator that your density is slipping. And so you might want to think about fertilization. Some areas may require 2 fertilization events per year to maintain a density that's good for water quality. The best timings for Wisconsin are Memorial Day and Labor Day for those. But if you're going to do that, keep the particles off the streets and the other impervious surfaces. Maintain a buffer. Don't throw the particles anywhere near the water's edge, and don't apply before a big rain or to a saturated soil that has recently been subjected to heavy rain. Clover is an awesome partner with Kentucky Bluegrass. We are doing some active research now on the station to figure out what the best timings and rates to incorporate clover into your yard are. Feel free to contact me for more information on that. And then compost is really good for improving density. Not only does it improve the soil, it adds nitrogen to the turf. It's kind of a 2-for-1 there. So thanks for your time today. Just wanted to put my contact information up here, my email, djsoldat@wisc.edu. I'd be happy to answer follow-up questions or provide additional information. So hope you have a great season and good luck.